Selection Sunday is behind us, and the NBA draft prospects are finally getting to show off in the biggest field of the year. It is March Madness is this week, starting Thursday, technically today, and we got you covered. We're going to talk about some of the best prospects and some of the best matchups to watch that will tell you a lot about these prospects. Next on Locked On NBA Draft.
You are Locked On NBA Draft, your daily podcast on the NBA Draft, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
My name is Richard Stamen. I am joined by Leaf Talene, as always, to talk NBA Draft and college basketball with you. We have a big week coming up ahead. It is the rounds of 68, 64, and 32 in college basketball as we head into the first weekend of March Madness. Leaf will cover some of what happened in the last week with conference tournaments. There were all the major tournaments wrapped up this last weekend. But first, what excites you about this upcoming week and everything, and big matchups? What are you looking forward to?
I mean, I can't wait for just madness to begin. Like it's honestly my favorite day of the year, the first day of madness. You just watch with your friends, you're checking your bracket constantly and the environment of it all. And I'll be going on Friday. I'm going to be watching some teams in San Diego, one of which is your squad, the TCU Horned Frogs. But no, yeah, I think there's a couple tantalizing matchups, one of which that I think is underrated because it might not have the appeal, but they have been a national brand the last few years. Loyola, Chicago, and Ohio State. That one's really interesting to me. I like another 7-10 is San Francisco and Murray State. I think that one's pretty awesome. And then I'm a big fan of the SDSU South Dakota State versus Providence in a 13-4.
Yeah, got to clarify which SDSU with San Diego State there as well. The 13-4s this year are really crazy because I could see three of them being upsets. I really don't see UCLA being beat. And we'll talk about some of these games a little bit more in depth. I know not to throw you under the bus, Leaf, but I know you haven't done your bracket yet because you committing full time. You haven't had ability to do that just yet. However, I rushed into it and I have overthought my bracket like no other, which means I'm going to do horribly. We're also going to be setting up a group as well if you want to join and just compare to us, see how the quote unquote experts do it, even though I would hardly consider myself an expert with this. But we will obviously get into that. One matchup that I'm very much looking forward to, I think is a really overlooked draft matchup, is Iowa versus Richmond. If you follow me on Twitter, I've talked about Jacob Gilyard and Tyler Burden. Tyler Burden's probably going to draw Keegan Murray. Really interested to see how those two face off against each other. And then the second round, if Memphis advances, they get Gonzaga. We get Jalen Duren versus Chet Holmgren. We've already seen Chet versus Paolo in a game. This is going to be another top 10 matchup for him. Really excited for that move. But let's actually go take a step backwards. Let's go into the conference tournaments, and we'll eventually come back to this. What stood out from the conference tournaments besides, I think, the very obvious one of Tennessee just steamrolling through the SEC tournament?
Yeah, that would have been my answer. I think one that sticks out to me is there anyone playing better than Keegan Murray? I was impressive as a team, but Keegan Murray, I think as we head to March Madness, is playing the best basketball of anyone. And we talk about Kemba candidates, and it's typically small guards on teams that are top tier seeds. I think Keegan Murray's got a chance to be a Kemba candidate. Like we talked about Johnny Davis having that possibility, and he still does. But Keegan Murray is shooting the lights out. He's an elite defender. And you watch that Iowa team play, and it's not just him. They're playing through him and using all of his abilities really well and helping them out. So I was really impressed with Iowa's run because they won 4 games in 4 days. And then one other team that I think impressed me, but it was they expected them to impress you, was Arizona. Is they lost Kirk Kriisa, and they found a way to win the tournament and look really good and put up amazing offensive numbers without their scoring point guard. So I was impressed with Tommy Lloyd's crew.
Yeah, Keegan Murray really could jump out. I mean, I'll just spoil this. I have them win the entire tournament. So that would be big for him. Another one who, I mean, kind of going back to that SEC for me, Kennedy Chandler, the most outstanding player in the conference tournament, averaged 15 points a game, 5 assists with just 1 turnover on 53% shooting and 50% from 3 on 4 attempts per game, was another person who really stood out to me. I really do think Jaden Ivy also was big. Obviously, you know, they couldn't win the Big Ten, but ultimately he had some big moments for himself too. Just needs to be under a little bit more control in the paint. What were some other things that stood out for you? Maybe it doesn't have to be a high major one. Obviously, the Power 5 finished up this weekend with Pac-12, all of it. What were some other ones throughout the entire process that maybe we didn't touch on in the last episode that stood out to you?
I think the Mountain West is a really good conference. I think people have kind of said that on Twitter all year. They've got 4 teams in the tournament. But I thought that all the games in that tournament were really competitive, and I didn't watch as many of those as I did some of the major conferences, which is, you know, it's hard to do. They're not as well televised. But you saw Colorado State pushed to the brink by Utah State, San Diego State, Boise State in the final was a 1-point game. And you saw these teams get seeded kindly. And I think that's something to be wary of when you fill out your bracket is like, how good are these teams that you don't know much about? And the answer is really good when they're playing each other super competitively within those 4 that made it. And Utah State, I would add as a 5th. That was, you know, I think they were in Joe Lunardi's next 4 out. Like that's really close to the tournament. And then one other thing is I'm surprised Texas A&M didn't make the tournament.
Yeah, they got completely screwed. They weren't even like the first team out. I mean, they also, I would say, steamrolled through the SEC tournament. And, you know, I get recency bias kind of sucks, but also Texas A&M wasn't that bad of a team. I mean, they lost to TCU barely. They're telling me that one win in November or one loss, in December was really that much of a difference maker. Like, they were a good team in the final month and a half. Like, and honestly, all year, they really weren't even bad. That was really weird to me. I don't know how Notre Dame got in over them. I thought that was a little bit weird, but let's talk actually about the first 4 games. We're not going to touch on the 16 seeds because, with all due respect, they're not pulling off the upsets over Arizona or Kansas, no matter how early one of us may or may not have them losing. That's just not happening. But we have 2 of them. We have Rutgers versus Notre Dame, and then we also have Wyoming versus Indiana. I know you have seen probably which team have you seen more of? I'm not going to put words in your mouth.
Of Indiana and Wyoming?
Or sorry, of any of them. Sorry, which team have you seen the most of the 4 that you would want to talk about?
I've seen Indiana plenty. I've seen the Big Ten. Rutgers and Indiana I've seen more than I've seen Notre Dame and Wyoming.
Yeah, let's start with Rutgers then. So with Rutgers, I think that's a good prospect matchup. You got Blake Wesley on Notre Dame, who's not a point guard, not a small forward, not a shooting guard, kind of positionless backcourt player who plays really good defense and can handle the ball, play make, growing jump shooter. And then on the other end, you have Ron Harper Jr., who would project as a shooting specialist in the NBA. Beyond the draft matchup, what do you see in this game? Because I personally didn't see Notre Dame even squeezing in, which makes them a prime candidate to make a run because that stuff always seems to happen.
I think this is a really interesting one, especially for Blake Wesley, because Rutgers has the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year on their roster and Caleb McConnell, and he'll likely draw the matchup regarding Blake Wesley. And so Blake Wesley, if he leads the Irish to a win and then another potential win against Alabama, which, you know, is a good team, they score a lot, but, you know, that I think Notre Dame's got a chance in that type of game. He really raises his draft stock a lot. Ron Harper Jr., you mentioned it. He's kind of got that I'm a veteran, I play well in big games kind of feel about him. I'm really excited for that. That's the most excited. Last year they had UCLA and Michigan State, which turned out to be a momentous game because Michigan State was up 14 and UCLA made the Final Four. So, you know, things happen. But this is one of the most excited I've been for a first 4 game in a long time. And I really do think that'll be a really close game. And depending the winner, I think they could beat Alabama. I think that it would behoove Rutgers. I think Rutgers has a better chance of beating Alabama than Notre Dame does. But you know what? I got to watch it before I tell you what I think about it. I got to do some research on that. But I'm excited for that one. And I'm also excited for Wyoming and Indiana. Trace Jackson Davis improved his draft stocks too.
Yeah, that's going to be a really interesting matchup. And just a little in-between thing. The play-in winner, I think all but it's either 1 or 2 years, and I can't remember. The play-in winner of these final last four in have gone on to the Sweet 16, I think all but 1 or 2 years. So when you are filling out your bracket, I would recommend I don't see this year being any different. I don't trust Alabama and I don't trust St. Mary's. So one of them, I've put both personally in there, better safe than sorry. And I think it's actually a real possibility that both teams could do it because the Alabama team is horribly inconsistent. This is a team that lost to Georgia, one of their very, very few conference wins, if any. I think that might have been their only one, actually. And then IU in Wyoming. I mean, that could go completely either way. In St. Mary's, who knows? Like, with Indiana, Wyoming, though, I think the matchups to watch, pretty much it continues with Trace Jackson Davis because he played really well. I thought, that Michigan game, I was like, cool, they're in the tournament now. And Trace Jackson Davis got his, he did what he needed to. He had 24 points, but he continued it in all three games that they played. He averaged 25 points per game on 67% shooting with 8 rebounds, 2 assists, and 2 blocks. Really impressive stuff from him. I'd love to see him continue that. And honestly, if he can do that against Wyoming, I see no reason why he can't do that against St. Mary's. I know St. Mary's has a decent post game. Trace Jackson Davis is an excellent defender at the rim and really can punish teams with his post spin. It's really lethal just the way he's so athletic. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Trace Jackson Davis is a first round pick if he had 30% more of a jump shot. Like, that's it. He literally has 0. If you made him 30% like better than he is now as a shooter, that is all it needs. Literally, that's taking a mid-range jumper consistently. He would be a first-round prospect without any doubt. So if he has a big tournament, he could raise his stock. But any thoughts before we go to break on that game?
I think that Indiana has the more athletic roster. Wyoming has probably a better backcourt, but they've played different levels of competition. The Big Ten, with all due respect to the Mountain West, the Big Ten is better. They have 9 teams in the tournament. And the one thing I'll say is, what makes deep runs in the tournament? It's defense and guard play. Indiana checks out the defense. They're very good defensively. Guard play, I'm hesitant to give them that check, but they did play better in the Big Ten tournament. They're trending in the right direction. And we got another, we may get to this soon, but we got another Big Ten Mountain West matchup with Michigan and Colorado State. And man, dude, I can't wait. It's March. Let's go. I just, I have to get that out there. It feels real now.
Yeah, it's the best time of the year. On the other end, we're going to talk about what matchups you need to be watching for NBA draft a little bit more in detail. We hinted at it earlier with a very light tease of Jalen Duren versus Chet Holmgren, but let's talk about it on the other side. But first, if you are looking for a place to bet on March Madness, look no further than betonline.net. BetOnline.net is the #1 source for all your sports betting needs and info. Don't forget, even though March Madness is happening, NBA is still going on, NHL is still going on, UFC, MMA, all of it. It remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So back with Leaf Tulane to talk about the March Madness NCAA Tournament, big matchups to watch from a draft perspective. Let's do this region by region. I think the West region, the Gonzaga Duke as the 1-2, offers the most NBA prospects. I actually haven't even researched before saying that, but I can just at a quick glance, you see Chet Holmgren, Jalen Duren. UConn could have somebody depending on how you slice it. Jalen Williams, JD Notae too, could be a summer league guy. Alabama has a few guys in Keon Ellis and JD Davison. Texas Tech has Terrence Shannon. Michigan State versus Davidson, elite draft matchup, in my opinion, for guys that are fringe first. Max Christie versus Pyeongchang Lee. That's Max Christie's on Michigan State. Lee's on Davidson. One of the best movement shooters in the draft is Lee. And then Duke. So eventually we're going to cross some paths. Whether it's Michigan State Duke or Davidson Duke, we're going to see some really strong matchups there. But before I just talk over you, what are some of the matchups in that one that you would love to see happen in the West?
I think that was the hardest 1 seed. Like, that comes out first. That's the top overall seed. Then you see Boise State, who won the Mountain West outright and the conference championship. Memphis, who you just mentioned as a top 10 pick in Jalen Duren and all the athleticism in the world on their roster. And then you get UConn and Arkansas. So from a college basketball standpoint, that was a terrible top side in my opinion. But as a draft prospect, I'm really excited to see the potential matchup of Jalen Duren and Chet, though I want to say Boise State very well could beat Memphis. If they match up in the second round, though, that's popcorn. You know, you get to see two centers that'll be top 10, and they're young, and they bring differing skill sets, but both very modern bigs. And I know you can say Duren is a kind of old school big, but do you see the way he moves when he chases people down? Like, he had this awesome block against Houston. I know they lost that game by 18, but they'd beaten Houston twice this year, which is a veteran-laden team. And Duren ran down the court and glassed something, and then he slides on pick and roll. He's got great hands. He's a good passer out of the post. Like, I know he like people say he looks like Dwight, like he moves like Bam. While those are unrealistic expectations for an 18-year-old, like, the fact that people can make those comparisons and not seem ludicrous is really impressive. And then I really like Jalen Williams as well, if we're staying with the big guy theme. And then, of course, you got Mark Williams on the bottom. But Jalen Williams is one of the most versatile bigs and underrated guys in the country. I've got him moving up my draft board significantly recently. He's since January 1st, he's averaging a double-double, and he's kind of playing the point center for Arkansas and letting JD Notae score rather than facilitate. And he's a really nice second-round prospect, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that covers the West pretty well. The only thing I'd add, I mean, I'd love to see Texas Tech versus Duke, just to see that no middle defense, see how Paolo responds, how AJ Griffin responds, because they're going to force shooting, and would AJ Griffin still make teams pay? That'll be an interesting one. Obviously, he'll get overemphasized or whatever, like something will happen. If he misses all the shots, people will be like, see, they're a fluke. And then if he makes all the shots, you know, they'll be like, oh, best shooter ever, and whatever. It's always going to happen. The next one is a tougher region too. It's the Arizona region. I struggled with this one personally, and I figure I'm going to go along the way and pick, since I know Leaf, you haven't done your bracket, and I don't mean to throw you under the bus with it, but you know, I do want to add that element to it. In the West, I do have Duke beating Gonzaga in the regional final. In the South region, it is horribly confusing, by the way, that it's on the right and it's the South. The stuff always throws me off, but I have Illinois winning that region overall, and I'm not confident in that whatsoever. And I have a lot of upsets on the way. I feel like this part of the bracket could be very upset heavy. Let's start with Colorado State. You talked about Mountain West. Talk to me about that matchup and why. I know you're intrigued by it. Personally, I am. Caleb Houston versus David Roddy. Talk to me about that matchup a little bit more.
I think David Roddy's an awesome player that's super underrated. Obviously, you got Hunter Dickinson as less of a prospect, just a dominant force in the middle for Michigan. Caleb Houston and Musa Diabote versus David Roddy. You see the veteran, the kind of grizzled vet who's got a really unconventional NBA body if he were to be, you know, a guy that they take in the second round, versus two like modern day 3s and 4s that are super lean and athletic. And that'll be really interesting to see the veteran versus the youngsters. And also on the other end, like, how, if David Roddy has to chase Caleb Houston, how does he do in that? You get to see a lot about his mobility. Musa Diabote is an elite vertical athlete. I'm very excited about that matchup. And I think that's one that everyone's going to have Michigan winning. And they're the 11 seed, but they're the power team. And so I'm curious to see that game, and that's the very first one on Thursday. So all eyes will be on that one, and it should be a great one.
Yeah, that's the opener. I didn't even think of that. And one thing to really consider is Michigan doesn't have Juwan Howard. Ever since he punched the Wisconsin assistant, he has been suspended. This bracket could go a lot of different ways. I will always go on record.
He's back though. He's back now.
Oh, yes, correct. Sorry. He was suspended before. Good point. Good correction. I do think Jay Wright is someone that you don't want to doubt. So I have Villanova in the Elite Eight personally. If you were to pull off some upsets in here, I'm going to lead with this one, and then I'm going to tell you the one I have. I have two big ones, but Illinois, Chattanooga jumps off the page. I know I said I have Illinois in the Final Four, but that one jumps off. My two I've chosen. I have TCU eventually beating Arizona. I know, spit out the jokes. It really depends on if Kirk Reese is there. And Leaf, I followed your guidance of guards win in March, and I'm not sure how much I trust the Arizona guards in March, to be quite honest. And I listened to Leafs' other podcasts, the College Basketball Hive. Great insight in that if you want to listen to it as well. But I also have UAB beating Houston. So talk to me about some upsets you see in this region.
That was one I like you said, I've had a crazy day, a nice 4 hours of sleep and 11 hours of work, so I haven't had time to do a bracket yet, but I am very in tune as who's playing and when. I do like the UAB Houston one. I got to see how well UAB rebounds, because what Houston does at an unbelievable level is offensive rebound. So if UAB can rebound defensively, that is something that I'm going to be eyeing, because they've got an awesome player as a go-to guard. And like you said, guards win in March. Guards and defense, baby. That's the recipe. I got to ask you about TCU in Arizona. So I agree with you. Kirk Risa, you want someone to be steady, and he's out, which, never bodes well when your point guard's out. Like we can talk about like Kendall Marshall in North Carolina. They could have won the championship. As soon as he gets hurt, they lose. Take me through why you took TCU, like from a basketball standpoint.
Yeah, one, I'm a home. No, I'm just kidding. No, for real though, what it actually was is TCU's great at rebounding, right? And I think it goes without saying, the entire Big 12, just about every team, very good defensively. I think that TCU has won the rebounding issue. I think they can negate Christian Coloco well, and then their guard play is better. So that's like the brief overview. But to me, over the last 2-3 weeks, they've figured out something, and I think they figured out a secret weapon. And that's Xavier Cork. And that's going to be what does it to Arizona, is Coloco's going to be neutralized. Not sure about Tabellis. I think Xavier Cork, though, could be that guy where he comes in, plays 15 minutes. The athleticism, the pick and roll ability really opens up in a more explosive way than it is with Lampkin, who is an outstanding rebounder. But Cork brings also some of that rebounding. And then also they've started playing fast of late. And that's why they've beaten Kansas. That's why they beat Texas. And that's why they beat Texas Tech, especially Texas Tech, and they overcame the elite defense and dropped. I don't remember what the exact number was, but they got what they wanted against some pretty dang good defenses, and I do think that they're in the right. They got all the momentum heading in, and I think they're going to get hot now. However, I will fully acknowledge it's such a risky pick, because TCU very well could lose to Seton Hall. I think that's a true toss-up of a game.
Well, as most 8-9s are, and then the other one we talked about this region. I just want to get my pick in here. Loyola Chicago and Ohio State, I think, is a true toss-up. That's a 7-10. We mentioned that at the top. Looking at some of this stuff, Ohio State's a narrow favorite, but if you look at betting lines, it's a pick-em game, and that indicates that it truly is a toss-up. Loyola Chicago is elite defensively. Ohio State's really good offensively. Loyola Chicago is slightly above average offensively, and Ohio State is a little below average defensively. And you look into that pretty much tells you it's going to be a very close game. Loyola Chicago can force a lot of turnovers. Ohio State doesn't force turnovers. I think that's going to be a very popular upset pick, and it really, to me, rests on the health of Ohio State's bigs. I think if Zed Key and Zach, what's his name? Kyle Young. I almost said Zach Young, but that's another big guy. But Kyle Young and Zed Key, if they're healthy, I think Ohio State has the upper hand, because they've got E.J. Liddell, and they've got some veterans who lost last year in the first round, and they'll know what to do. And Loyola Chicago doesn't have Cameron Krutwig anymore, so Lucas Williamson is their go-to player, and I don't think he's as adept against some of the bigger teams. He didn't have a great game against Michigan State, who's a comparable team as another 7 seed from the Big Ten.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. I know Loyola is kind of the sexy pick at this point based on what they've done the last few years in the tournaments, the whole Sister Jean thing, all of it. So I totally get it. I go back and forth on that. I currently do have Loyola, but I could really see an argument for Ohio State. And one matchup to watch, if Ohio State wins and gets past if they just get past Loyola Chicago, I miscalculated that. A really good draft matchup to watch. And it's more, the two prospects aren't draftable. Only one of them is, but Colin Gillespie versus Malachi Branham would be a really fun matchup. And then also Jermaine Samuels versus E.J. Liddell. I think both of those are very good tests in how both of those players go against high IQ, just at their position defenders that aren't overwhelming, or on the other end, how do they defend these high IQ? Like for Gillespie, for example, such a high IQ player who beats teams without scoring. How does Branham contain that? So That's something to watch. But on the other end of this, we're going to go to break real quick. But first, we're going to talk about some of the games in the final two regions that we haven't covered. But first, this episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing number of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why enter often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand the warehouse happens to carry? Save time and money with Rock Auto instead. Why choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership when you can go to Rock Auto, which is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Rock Auto's prices are reliably low for every single customer, and they have everything you could need. Brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto part needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Write "locked on" in 2 words in their "How did you hear about us" box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. So finishing up our NCAA preview, let's head down to the East region, which is the Baylor region. And this one, I see absolute chaos, but for the life of me, I cannot predict it. It has your Virginia Tech Hokies, which, by the way, I'd like to point out, one of us, and it's not me wearing this white shirt, predicted Virginia Tech winning the ACC tournament. You want to go ahead and take your victory lap?
I sensed a hungry team that was well underseeded. They had a good path because Notre Dame and Virginia Tech, to me, were equally adept. I mean, you see Notre Dame was a 2 in ACC and Virginia Tech was a 7, but one's a 10, one's an 11. And they had a good path. I liked their matchups, so I appreciate the shout-out, and good job, Hokies, for making me look smart.
Yeah, do you see them winning a game in the tournament? They start off against Texas.
Yeah, we mentioned this earlier. This is one of my favorite games entering, and I think this is a true toss-up. Texas has a lot of good athletes. They're very good defensively, and Virginia Tech's awesome offensively. So it really comes down to who's better in a close game, and I got to look at it, man. But I think right now I'm leaning towards Virginia Tech.
Yeah, this region as a whole, I think, is going to be one of the biggest upset regions just because I don't trust any of the top seeds. I would trust Baylor a lot more if Jonathan Chachua was healthy, who's the anchor, arguably, of their defense.
And LJ Cryer.
Yeah, and LJ Cryer. I knew one of the guards, and I was like, I don't want to botch which one it is. I couldn't remember if it was him or Flagler or who. But yeah, they're a little bit injured. They're vulnerable. Ultimately, I have Purdue coming out of this region. I think there's a lot of chances for upset. I think if Texas and Purdue play, I think that's a really tough matchup. The defense of Texas. I mean, you may not even see Texas in the second round. And then there's Murray State could play in-state rival Kentucky. We know how that stuff goes. We've seen Dayton play Ohio State, and, they come out with a little bit of anger. A lot of them aren't recruited by Kentucky, and they take it personally. And like I said, St. Mary's plays the winner of Wyoming versus Indiana. Take the play-in winners. I think that's an obvious one for me, but talk to me about this region, because are you on the same page as me with this region being chaos but hard to predict?
I think the team with the best draw in this region is Kentucky. Murray State relies heavily on shooting the ball, and I'm not sure if I'll take San Francisco or Murray State. I think that's the game I'm most excited for in the entire first round, I think. And Kentucky, if Murray State were to win, and that they would play Kentucky, assuming Kentucky takes care of St. Peter's, Murray State struggles with size. They had Janai Broom of Morehead State torch them in their conference championship. Who is on Kentucky but Oscar Tshiebwe, the leader in the clubhouse for National Player of the Year? I think that's a tough matchup, so I like that matchup for Kentucky. Purdue, if they were to advance, but I don't know. Like you mentioned, Texas and Virginia Tech is tough for Purdue, and I'm a little off the Purdue bandwagon as much as I love Matt Painter, and I love Matt Painter. Like, you can listen to my stuff from, like you mentioned on the College Sports Hive, like dating to 2 years ago, and Matt Painter is like the talk of the town on that podcast with my buddy Scott Stevens and I. And then, but Kentucky matches up really well against Purdue. And then I think Baylor and UCLA is in a Sweet 16 if they were to get there. Granted, I think St. Mary's and or Indiana, Wyoming could be tough for UCLA because the pace will be slow. But I really like UCLA and Kentucky to come out of there. And I love Baylor, but I I think unless LJ Cryer comes back, because we know JTT's out. If LJ Cryer comes back, that changes things. But if he's out, I just think it's really hard for them to beat a couple of these teams in a row.
Yeah, UCLA, I don't know what to think of them. Tiger Campbell has had a pretty good season overall. I mean, I'd say, statistically, it hasn't been a major breakout, but the final 2 games, the semis and the finals, he played really well in the conference tournament. And, obviously they lost to Arizona in the final, but ultimately he was really good. He's had some big flashes, especially over last month or so. And I think that's a big part of UCLA's success. Ultimately, I cannot for the life of me point out where this chaos is going to come from. But in my bracket, I personally have Purdue coming out of here and only 2 teams that are not the higher seeded winning a first round game. And that's just not going to happen. It's the Wyoming IU play in, and then I have Marquette beating North Carolina, which doesn't really matter because I don't see either beating Baylor. That region is incredibly crazy. But let's talk about the 2 big draft matchups that could come from this real quick. Jaden Ivy versus Tai Tai Washington. And then also Jaden Ivy versus however you want to slice up Baylor. That would be so fun. Jaden Ivy, this whole draw actually has some pretty good matchups. I'm not going to pretend I watched a ton of Yale. I really expected Princeton to get in. I was researching them a little bit. But say that it plays out the way I have it. Marcus Carr, one of the better off-ball defenders in the entire country. Tai Tai Washington, who would just be a great back-and-forth matchup. Don't even worry about the head-to-head. That should just be fun. And then against Baylor, I mean, I'd say Jeremy Suhan, he gets him. That would be a true test for both guys on, Suhan's defense and Ivy's offense. What are there any other big matchups in that region that you're looking for?
I think the way Baylor would deal with a potential North Carolina matchup, and then a guy that I really like, and I haven't watched a ton of him this year, but I watched him last year, and he's emerged as a first-team All-Big East guy, and is Justin Lewis of Marquette, and he'll be contending with Leaky Black, who is a first-team All-Defense player. Leaky Black isn't a pro prospect per se, but that's a battle matchup, and I like that one. And then if North Carolina were to advance, I think Jeremy Suhan and Flo Thamba against Armando Bacot is really fun as well. And then one more, I think we talked a little bit about this, but Malachi Branham and Lucas Williamson. Oh, shoot, I'm in the wrong region. That was one I wanted to get to earlier. I'm in the wrong region. Excuse me. Late night tired me is making mistakes here. But I do have another one. I have the size of Keve Aluma against the lack of size of Texas in that first round one. I really like that matchup. Christian Bishop and Timmy Allen, a little bit of Trey Mitchell in there, Dylan DeSue. They've got a lot of guys on Texas, but none of them stand out to me as like who will guard Keve Aluma. And I think he should have a good matchup. And then Justin Mutz guarding that kind of combination of front court guys on Texas. And that's, like I mentioned, one of the games I'm most excited for.
Yeah, 2 things. So first of all, Keve Aluma is a guy who not that athletic, ridiculously high IQ. He can stretch the floor. He makes everybody around him better. He's a really good player. I do think he'll get summer league looks. I thought he should have come out last year. I was probably wrong. He did a lot this year. And honestly, it's probably his stock is ever so lightly increased to maybe being a top 100 player. His play style is, I'm not even going to say that's nothing. That's ridiculous. He does play at his own tempo. There are some great power forwards in the history of the game that have also done this, but he is not in skill compared to some of the great power forwards in history. I'll leave it at that. The other thing you talked about was
right, were you about to compare to Dirk? Were you about to compare to Dirk?
I'll tell you off air, and you know what? If you want to roast me publicly, go for it. But the other thing
I won't. But you're making me think here.
The other thing was you said, Leaky Black's not a NBA guy, and I think it's important to know who these guys are going against, because you can't just watch a game and going, oh yeah, well, it's just this team, whatever, because it's so much deeper than that. Like when you see Justin Lewis, that's a true test going against Leaky Black. Him and Daryl Morcell are both going to be facing up against him, and that's a real test. Knowing that personnel is hugely valuable in scouting. I just wanted to kind of touch on that. I think that's super valuable. But we'll head over to the final region. I think it's the best region, if not the West region. They both have the word West in it. So the Midwest. This one is headlined by Kansas as the 1 and Auburn at the 2. The draft matchups in this, maybe that's what's blinding me, but the draft matchups in this region, the upside is so crazy. I mean, I have 4 that really jump out to me as to, dang, I really want to see that. You have Iowa versus Auburn would be a crazy good Elite Eight. You would have Keegan Murray versus Jabari Smith. You could have, this isn't anything out of the ordinary, but Tari Eason versus Jabari Smith. They've played in conference. You could have Johnny Davis versus Jabari Smith. And notice all these are Jabari Smith at this point. But one last one. Isaiah Mobley versus Jabari Smith. I actually think that might be Jabari Smith's in terms of length. That would be one of the hardest games he would have. That is USC is a very long team, and I would love to see how he does against them. Talk to me about what you see in this region. And obviously, I know you haven't done the bracket, but what you want to see going forward in this region.
I think this is the most wide open region, actually. I think Kansas got the best draw of all the ones, which irritates me greatly, to be honest, because the number 1 overall seed should have the best draw. The number 2 should have the second best. And I think Gonzaga and Arizona in that order got the worst 2 draws. And so, small rant aside, I think that this region has the best prospects, though. Iowa's playing great. I mentioned Keegan Murray is playing the best of anyone in the country. Johnny Davis, who's going to be a first-team All-Americans in it. Jabari, who could be the number 1 pick. You mentioned that. One matchup, Baylor Shireman and Justin Minaya, who, once again, not necessarily a NBA guy. All-defense team, Big East, on a Providence team that won the Big East against the dude who can shoot the lights out in Baylor Shireman and South Dakota State. And then I just think that there's a couple like tantalizing college basketball matchups in this one, and an interesting underlying storyline for LSU fired Will Wade. How are they going to regroup and play? Like, is Tari Eason going to be unleashed and play more than 24 minutes per game? Could they match up with Johnny Davis? Tari Eason, Johnny Davis is another one that you could see very conceivably. And then Creighton and San Diego State from a basketball perspective, that's going to be an awesome defensive game. And I wonder how they'll defend Ochai Agbaji, assuming Kansas can get past one of Texas Southern, or I don't even know what TCC stands for. So no offense to TCC. If you beat Kansas, I will fess up big time. I will eat some crow, or Jayhawk in that case. But yeah, no, I'm really excited for this region. And I think that this one has the most appealing draft matchups, like you said. And Isaiah Mobley, I think you made a great point. Isaiah Mobley, Max Agampolo, Chavez Goodwin, and Drew Peterson are all 6'9" and above in the front court. What our Auburn thrives on is being bigger and faster and stronger than teams. Their guard play is not great, and USC's isn't either. So it'll be an interesting one. Whoever has fewer turnovers, if that matchup were to happen, and if Jabari's not splashing shots like he's been able to like bail out Auburn at times. You saw Texas A&M overwhelm them. I think USC's got the recipe and the physical attributes to do so. So good call on your part in that one.
Thanks. Yeah, I actually disagree. Going back to your first point, I think Kansas has a really, really hard draw. I do think the 8-9 game is very favorable to them. And by the way, San Diego State, you brought up how good of a defensive matchup that'll be. San Diego State is the number 2 defense. Creighton is number 18, so 2 top 20 defenses. That's a crazy good matchup. I'm very excited for Iowa, Kansas. I personally have Iowa coming out of this, and not only coming out of this, I have them winning the entire tournament. I'm just all in on Keegan Murray being that good, not only as a prospect, I'm probably being blinded by that, but I also think that his collegiate skill is really translatable to the tournament. There's a lot of chances for upsets here. I think this is the side of the bracket I have the absolute most. You could make an argument LSU is an upset in some ways, based on the whole, like you said, Will Wade is gone. So that game to me is the biggest toss-up of the entire, actually second biggest, to USC Miami. Those are the 2 biggest toss-ups for me of the entire March Madness NCAA tournament. And my bold take is, you kind of said it about Auburn. You summed it up really well. Auburn's beatable. I really do think the winner of USC Miami, they're going to the Sweet 16 at least. Do you see any crazy upsets in this bracket?
I could see one of Iowa State or LSU beating Wisconsin. Johnny Davis didn't look right in his game back from injury in the Big Ten tournament against Michigan State, and they're extremely reliant on him. And I wouldn't be terribly surprised. I don't think I'll pick this, but I wouldn't be surprised if Creighton or San Diego State beat Kansas. I've mentioned I'm not a huge Kansas believer. Remy Martin played really well in the Big 10 tournament, Big 12 tournament, but this is a wide open region. And I want to ask one final question. Keegan Murray is shooting 40.5% from three. We talked about how much we love him as prospects. Speaking of old claims, I talked about Keegan Murray as a draft prospect last year. And the question for me was like, oh, I don't think he can shoot. Well, he's shooting 40.5%. He went 8 of 10 against Indiana. He went 3 of 8 against Purdue and 3 of 3 against Northwestern in the Big Ten tournament. So he's playing big-time basketball on the big-time stage. How high do you have him on your board, and what would winning a championship like you have them doing do to you? Like, I mean, DiVincenzo was like the big example. Like he went from a mid-second round pick to 17th pick. How high do you have Keegan currently, and how high could you see yourself having him?
Yeah, I have him number 8 on my board, but I don't think a March Madness run would really change anything because, I mean, it's just more games of – it'd just be more sample size of what I feel like I've already seen, right? Like if he does that, it would just kind of be confirming my placement more than me going, oh, I need to keep moving him because I don't think March Madness matters that much. Unless you really dominate a matchup, like for me – it's more like solidifying what I've seen because I value 25 to 30 game sample size a little bit more than these 5 tops, 5, 8, or what is it, like 7 games, I think is what it is to win.
Six for the seeded teams, 7 for the playing teams.
Right. So 6 for the most likely candidates. Those 6 games are nice, but for the most part, you do your research in the regular season, solidify some stuff. I just really do think that teams, like we saw Buffalo in 2018, they shut down DeAndre Ayton. They had an entire game plan. Nate Oates built a wonderful game plan around DeAndre Ayton. It was a little bit alarming, and I should have probably taken those flags seriously, but it's not the end-all be-all. Franz Wagner's stock fell because of March Madness last year. He's fine. And then De'Aaron Fox shutting down Lonzo Ball, I think it was a big one. That I think more of the matchups are where I would maybe change stuff, but for the most part, my big board's not really going to change from one run. Would it impact you? And I don't know if I answered it, but Keegan Murray 8.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Keegan could go up for me like 1-2 spots maybe, but for me, I've always had Keegan Murray and Benedict Mathurin over Johnny Davis, which was at midway through the season fairly controversial. And a lot of people were screaming for Johnny Davis. And, props to those people. They very well could be right. But, like, who am I going to pass him over? I'm not going to pass him over the 18-year-old AJ Griffin. I don't think that's kind of like the top where I could see him getting. I don't think I can pass him over Shaedon Sharpe if he were to be in the draft. And so you're getting to the 6-7 range, and that's kind of the max for Keegan because he's 22 years old, in my opinion. But I love Keegan Murray, man. I think he's unbelievable.
Yeah, he's a fun player, and I also am with you on the Johnny Davis hype. I mean, he's my 5th ranked prospect, 4th ranked, excuse me, in this region. Just to highlight some, I have one major upset. I actually have Colgate beating Wisconsin. You brought up the best points. I mean, you said it best. Wisconsin without Johnny Davis, when he is not on, that team is not on because they run through him. And then on top of that, also, he's just not entirely. I don't know if he's 100%. So Colgate was there last year. I think they, learning from getting smacked by Arkansas, who ended up being an Elite 8 team. Maybe they can bounce back, even without Jordan Burns, a guy who went to Summer League. Colgate could make some noise. I don't know how much noise. I originally had them going to the Sweet 16, but that's ridiculous. LSU or Iowa State would beat them. It's more of, I think Wisconsin's a little bit overseeded, but ultimately, this is a great, great region. There's a lot to watch. This has probably the best star-studded prospects. There's also some good sleepers. I love Isaiah Wong in Miami. I couldn't get through the podcast without mentioning his name.
I wondered.
Yeah, it took me 44 minutes without saying it, but here we are. So there's a lot of good matchups. Ultimately, so I said Iowa is coming out of mine, the region for me. My Final Four, I have Duke over Purdue and then Iowa over Illinois. And again, not confident in Illinois. By the time you read this or hear this, my bracket probably has changed because that's how it's been every time I talk about it. I change it up. And then I have Iowa killing the Hollywood ending for Coach K. He is this close to getting his Hollywood ending. But Leaf, you haven't done your bracket yet, which is not an issue because it's better to do it slow and composed than rushed and rushed like some of us did. I don't know who, but definitely someone in this frame. But this was this week's March Madness preview. We'll be back next week to talk about what happened in this first weekend, the round of 32, round of 64. I know Leaf will be at the games. He'll be providing some awesome commentary on Twitter, I assume, at Leaf Tulane. I didn't mean to put that pressure on you, but we will be back next week. And thank you so much for making us your first listen of every day. For your second one, go ahead and listen to Locked On NBA. Don't forget, even with March Madness, Locked On NBA is still going strong, and the NBA season is going strong. But thank you so much, and we will see you next week.